was all an accident.
Oscar-winning producer Brian Grazer grew up in Los Angeles, but never intended to work in Hollywood.
I didn't know they made movies and television shows, 30 miles from me.
But he got a desk job right after college and started running into some pretty famous people, including Warren Beatty.
I knew he was a star, but I didn't appreciate the gravity of what that was.
Brian was just delivering some documents, but his curiosity got him some real FaceTime.
And he was incredibly generous with his time, and I sat with him and drank coffee for about an hour.
And after that initial success, Brian decided he wanted to talk to as many Hollywood power brokers as he could.
Jules Stein, the founder of MCA, every chairman of every studio, the 10 master filmmakers of that time, Herbert Ross, Francis Coppola.
This same approach led Brian to meet Ron Howard, a child actor who wanted to become a director.
And I thought, well, it would be interesting to understand what he is thinking about.
They immediately clicked, and over the next 40 years, they would establish one of the most legendary relationships and partnerships in Hollywood. The two have been responsible for films and TV shows like Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, Parenthood, The Da Vinci Code, Splash, Arrested Development. I could go on and on. Brian will talk about all of this, including their partnership, so let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Hollywood producer Brian Grazer. Let's start with let's sort of go back a little bit, or a lot. I know you grew up. I mean, you're a child of the San Fernando Valley, like I am, by the way. I grew up in. I went to Chatsworth High School.
You know where I went?
Where did you go?
Chatsworth High School.
Did you really?
I swear to God, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
We both went to Chatsworth High School. So, oh my God. Okay.
Yeah.
Val Kilmer went to Chatsworth High School.
And I made Kevin Spacey, right?
100%. Yes. Well, I cannot believe you went to Chatsworth High School. I would have never guessed.
Different high school these days, I think. But yeah, I mean, I graduated in the 90s, and you graduated in the 70s, and we and so I know the environment where you grew up. When you grew up in the Valley, it was all orange groves, probably.
Yes. Yeah. Well, predominantly, yeah.
And when I grew up there were still a lot of orange groves, but they were shrinking because they were building developments, and now there are no orange groves.
Oh, I know, it's unfortunate. But yeah, on Devonshire, it was all orange groves. And then north of Devonshire, which is now like Porter Ranch or Porter Ridge, that didn't exist. That was just mountains. And I used to drive my dune buggy up there and ride around. Yeah.
I remember when they were building it, I used to ride my mountain bike as a kid in that area.
Oh, wow, really?
I would see coyotes.
Yeah, of course, I bet. Oh my God, that's wild.
So you grew up in this environment but not. I mean, the thing is that people tend to think of Los Angeles as Hollywood, and about 5% of LA people in LA are involved in Hollywood. But when you grew up in the Valley, you were far removed from that world. I mean, this was not part of your life, right?
Correct. I was so far removed. First of all, I grew up in Sherman Oaks, and probably not far from where you grew up, because we both went to Chatsworth High School, and then moved to Northridge, and that's where Chatsworth High School came into play for me. But really in a cul-de-sac, and I didn't leave the radius of 3 miles till college for the most part. My parents, we didn't go on, extensive, big vacations. And we went, the furthest we went to San Diego, to the Town and Country Inn, where I would eat club sandwiches and just revel in that.
Yeah.
But so that's how I grew up. I grew up just very, very quintessentially middle class, just straight down the middle. And for a while, I was apologetic about that, particularly when I went to USC. And then later in life, I realized it was one of a strength of mine, in a creative universe, because I like pop culture.
Especially because in Hollywood, and it's not different in sports, so many people in Hollywood grew up in that environment. And it's not surprising, because I think there is a talent gene that oftentimes gets passed on. That's why you have so many NBA players. One of their parents was a D1 athlete. So many actors, one of their parents is an actor, because those genetics are passed down to them. But you were not like marinated in that culture at all.
No, I wasn't. I didn't know that I didn't know that movies were made where I was living.
Yeah.
I had no idea about Hollywood in the industry sense. And again, as I said, I didn't know they made movies and television shows,
Yeah.
30 miles from me.
Were you like a kind of kid who would go to the movies and go to the movie theaters? Were you really into movies when you were a kid, or was it just sort of part of what you were interested in?
It was only part of what I was interested in. And those movies were largely like James Bond movies, escapists, in glamorous environments.
So when you were sort of, as you mentioned, you went to USC. When you got there, I mean, I know, and eventually we'll talk about this because I think the plan was that you'd go to law school. Was that the plan, that you would go to
Yes.
USC and become a lawyer?
Yeah, out of default, yes. I would go to USC, and that would help me form a direction as to what to do. And I just asked myself the question, which one of the three occupations should I go into? So I applied to law school, got into USC Law School.
And tell me a little bit about how you saw your life playing out. I mean, because obviously not only did it play out differently, but you became very influential in this industry. But when you were, I don't know, 18, 19, 20, did you even see, or did you have any interest in that industry at all?
No interest at 18, 19, or 20. It was all an accident. I overheard some guys outside my apartment complex where I went just finishing undergraduate, and they were talking about the easiest job they've ever had. It was almost like a contest. And I thought, wow, I need a job. And if it sounds if it's easy, they just said it was easy. And it turned out to be at Warner Brothers in the legal department as a law clerk. And that all kind of made sense because my plan was to go to law school. But I didn't know what that meant. I just got a job there as a clerk, but I still didn't really get it.
Yeah. You tell this story in the introduction to your book, A Curious Mind, which I read, and it's basically you overhear these guys saying, oh, yeah, I was a legal clerk, but I quit. It was so easy. And it was a summer before you were supposed to start law school at USC, and you thought, okay, That's great. I can be a legal clerk. You literally heard these people calling.
Yeah.
At that time, you can't do this today, but you could just call 411, get the number for Warner, call the switchboard at Warner, ask for the name of the general counsel, which you did,
and then
get to the reception, get to that person's secretary and say, hey, I'm calling about an open job. She literally puts you through to the guy, and he's like, yeah, when can you come for an interview? I mean, it's serendipity, but that stuff happened. I mean, that was the world we lived in. That stuff
really happened. Yes, that stuff really happened in the 70s. You could do that.
Before I ask you about, we talk a little bit about that change in your career. I want to kind of dive into you as sort of a student or an academic performer, because from what I gather, you didn't see yourself as necessarily a good student. I mean, I know you struggled with dyslexia, but from what I gather, you weren't necessarily like confident about your intellectual skills. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I wasn't confident about my intellectual skills. I knew that I was living basically on this line of curiosity and conversation, and I was always able to gain something from that kind of interaction. Even in high school, even though I couldn't fully isolate that, I was always pretty popular. And I wasn't trying to be popular, but I was just innocent and curious, and people liked that. I guess I was just likable.
Yeah.
In college, I was able to get through this dyslexia by reading and then with a yellow marker, underline, and then synthesize and continue to edit and synthesize to the point that I'd embed that in my mind, go to sleep, and wake up and have it living in there. And I was able to perform pretty well academically once I found the art form of how to take a test.
You mentioned this idea of you didn't seek to be popular, but you were liked. You had a lot of friends, which is an incredibly important sort of skill that I think people can develop, and obviously important for what you would do with your career. You've got to get people on side.
Yes.
And one of the things that I wonder, about is how do you think you did that? I mean, a lot of, especially teenagers, and are nervous about seeming uncool, or asking questions that make them seem like they're not in the know. But it seems like you never really consciously worried about that. That you were, as you describe yourself, almost naively curious and friendly. But it served a purpose.
And it served a purpose 100%. I think I got to a point where everyone has to have one success. And with your one success, I think, having produced Friday Night Lights and really lived inside of that, young boy's mind, once a boy has one thing that can fortify them or animate confidence in their being, they can then do things they wouldn't ordinarily do, but by nature want to do. So I always wanted to say, gee, I don't know the answer, or no, what would you do? And I turn it into questions. And so, but there was a time, of course, where you're embarrassed to do that. You're embarrassed to say, I don't know. But I reached a point where I thought, this very unedited approach, I'm going to go about it, and it really worked for me. And believe it or not, I still do that. Because I've found that I'm forgiven for not knowing the answer if you're just truthful, and people feel your soul, your intention, I guess I would say.
When you got that job as a legal clerk at Warner Brothers, working for a guy named Peter Knecht, I think.
Yes.
What was it about that job? Because you were still intending to go to law school. This was not like, oh, I'm going to go into Hollywood. But that, of course, changed everything for you. What was it about doing that job, which otherwise could be a very boring job, that sort of got your mind thinking, this is what I want to do with my life?
Well, I didn't have that moment, this is what I want to do in my... Okay, no, I did, actually, but it was gradual.
Yeah.
My job was to just deliver papers. So I sat in an office.
Contracts, right?
Contracts. And they were often stacks of papers that were very, very detailed and weighty. They could be almost a foot deep, the papers, in terms of there was a lot. You'd carry a big, bulky group of papers, and your job is to deliver those. And so my first papers that I were to deliver were to Warren Beatty, who was the biggest star in the world. But I didn't really realize that, or I knew he was a star, but I didn't appreciate the gravity of what that was, that a director and a movie star, and he's good looking and all those things. He was winning at everything. But I again, didn't understand the depth or gravity in that. But the job was to deliver papers. I went to the Beverly Wilshire Hotel where he lived, and someone came down, an assistant, and said, hand me the papers. And back and forth that went, and I, at 22 years old, said, well, the papers are invalid unless I hand them directly to Mr. Beatty himself, which wasn't true, but I just was a moment where I thought to say that. And then I got to meet Warren Beatty, and he was incredibly generous with his time, and I sat with him and drank coffee for about an hour, to the chagrin of his fleet of assistants. But I thought, wow, I learned so much in this 1 hour. And then I realized I could do that every time I had to deliver a paper.
So you begin this career as a legal clerk, but eventually, and during that time you mentioned Warren Beatty, but you also delivered contracts and documents to Lew Wasserman, who was the head of Paramount, and all these famous agents. And I guess you had this tactic of insisting that you had to hand deliver it to them. What were you trying to do? I mean, because not all. I'm assuming most of the time they would just say thanks, kid, and you would leave. But
Yes,
I guess
yeah.
your goal, your plan was to see if you could just talk to them for a little bit. And what were you trying to find out? What do you remember?
Well, I know what I remember. I remembered that because I did learn something at school. But I realized that the engine inside of any business is similar to the engine of that. There was a commonality, and it was always language or vocabulary, the lexicon, that was the thing that made it more mystifying. So what you do in tech is not so similar. It's quite similar to what you do in building a movie. Because everything is starting basically at zero or at an idea that's abstract, and then you're trying to build it into something that's material. In the case of movies, it would be a movie or television show if you do that. In the case of any other business, it would be that particular product, but it's the language that confuses you. So ultimately what I was trying to do was learn about the language of Hollywood, learn about it was such an opaque business. You just thought the business was all done at parties, but it wasn't all done at parties. And so I learned about it. And so I kept doing these conversations to meet new people, to expand, my mind intellectually in terms of, in the case of Lou Wasserman, who was he? What was that? That business itself. He was the founder of Universal Pictures.
Yeah, this was in the early '70s, and I when I was reading about it, I was imagining that film, that docu series or the dramatic series, The Offer, about the making of The Godfather, and
that was great.
People like Bob Evans, who were these legendary, producers. It was really about the '70s in Hollywood, right? And
yes.
Did it capture that? I mean, the world that you were a tiny little bit player. You weren't even a player. You were just a tiny little thing at the time. But was the world you observed similar to that?
100%. It was so glamorous and so big because, images are being magnified on a big screen, so everything is bigger than life, including their lives are bigger than life. They drove very fancy cars. They had cars and drivers. So basically, it was very much like The Offer. That's what it looked like. Oddly, when I did get a job, real job, as a producer at Paramount, my office was right above Robert Evans in what was called the Director's Building. Yeah.
Is that when you were working for Edgar Sherrick?
That was after Edgar Sherrick.
That was after. Okay, so you basically begin this legal job. Kind of, you don't go to law school, and you decide to really pursue this work in Hollywood. And tell me a little bit about how you began to build your career, because when you're young in Hollywood, it's hard, right? People don't take you seriously at first. You've got to figure out how to punch through that.
Yes. Well, the meeting that I had, I would create a meeting for myself every single day for until they fired me. So it was, they eventually fired me at Warner Brothers.
You would set up meetings with who?
Well, with Lou Wasserman, his boss, Jules Stein, the founder of MCA, every chairman of every studio, the 10 master filmmakers of that time, Herbert Ross, Francis Coppola. Yeah.
How did you do that? You're 23, 24, 25 years old. How did you do that?
Well, okay. When I asked my boss, the Peter Connect at the legal department, can I stay on for the next year? I'll push back law school a year. I then had a full year to meet more people. So what I was able to do is cold call all of those people by phone and speak to their assistants. You have to always pay tremendous respect and attention to everybody's assistant. I still at this stage in my life, I still place my own phone calls to people that I know, to all the agents. I don't want them to wait on hold. I want to speak to the assistant. I want to make them laugh. It's just a built-in part of my discipline. So I was able to do that every single day, and every person said yes, because I got the assistant or the assistant to the assistant on my side.
And what would you say? You would say, can I just have like a 20-minute coffee with him and just ask him about what he does?
I had this little speech. I'd say, hi, my name is Brian Grazer. I'm calling from Warner Brothers Business Affairs. This is not associated with studio business, but I've researched your boss and would like to have only 5 minutes of his time. And I promise you, I will not ask for a job. So I had all these disclaimers, and then that would trigger a conversation beyond that. And they would eventually get me 5 minutes with their boss that always turned into at least 30 minutes. But if it was 5 minutes, I'd take the 5 minutes and leave. I was always very tuned into their timetable and didn't respect any promise that I'd ever made.
And basically, you would ask them just for general advice?
Well, I'd usually come up with something that I'd researched them enough that I had something intelligent to ask them other than just advice. It's really hard just to ask somebody for general advice. They don't know where to start, and it's annoying. So I'd say to Coppola, for example, I would have said, I'm sure I said, I know I always had an in to somebody. So with Coppola, I said, I met Diane Keaton on the lot as a law clerk, which was true. And it was, and how did you choose her as to be in The Godfather? I might say something like that. Because I did meet Diane Keaton. I was driving on the lot, and I looked in my rearview mirror, and there was a girl wearing espadrille shoes, which was a new style of shoe in that day. And I thought, wow, those are so interesting. And she has an interesting quality, very approachable. So I stopped my car and, created a chit chat with her.
Did any of those conversations eventually lead to somebody saying, oh, I know somebody you may want to talk to them about, they're looking for somebody?
Yes, they did. Some of them led to conversations. Yes. And that was very helpful. It didn't get me a job, actually, but it was helpful to meet more people. And pretty soon I felt like I knew not only a lot of people, but I knew a lot about the entertainment business. Because, of course, I learned you must read the trades. You have to read, today would be Deadlight Hollywood. There's so much media information on podcasts and news. So I would always be 1,000% up to date on that. So I knew the name of every writer in Hollywood. And that became I knew the names of every person in Hollywood. Whether I met them or not, I knew their names, and I knew what the writers wrote, and I knew what they currently wrote and what they wrote before that. So I was that was my, that was a big value to know all these names.
Yeah.
It was a way of really being in the middle of Hollywood.
Tell me a little bit about what you were doing. Like when around the time when you met Ron Howard, were you a powerful producer? Were you, how would you describe your job?
Okay.
Role?
When I met Ron Howard, I was on the Paramount lot where they shot the Robert Evans TV series. I was on that lot, and I always still did the discipline of meeting a new person all the time. I was successful in a young, successful television producer at 25, but I really wanted to be a theatrical movie producer, big screen movie producer. And when I met him, he wanted to be a big screen movie director. So we were two young guys that had similar ambition and dream. And so we shared that dream, and that's how we met.
Did anybody take Ron Howard seriously? I mean, he was a child actor. He was Opie, and then he was Richie Cunningham. And we know the story about child actors, that there's the graveyard of, former actors is huge.
Yes.
And Ron is different. I've read his book, and obviously his career speaks for itself.
Yeah.
But at the time, were people like, I don't know, Ron Howard, director?
Yes, they were doing Ron Howard, the director, and many people, almost everybody, didn't take him seriously at all. There was one person, but I didn't know that person, and I didn't know about it. George Lucas took him seriously because he was in American Graffiti, and
of course,
and they probably talked about shooting Super 8 movies when they were kids, and probably I'm sure had a lot to share with one another about that. But I didn't know that George Lucas believed in him, so it was hard to get our first movie made because of that reason. They didn't take him seriously.
But before that happened, because you had this discipline of just approaching people,
yes,
and starting conversations with them. Because from what I understand, I mean, the story that you've told is that you basically got in touch with him or met him and said, hey, why don't we meet and just talk about our kind of career goals?
Yes, that's 100%. That's exactly what we did.
Why Ron? Why did you focus on him?
Well, I just saw him on the Paramount lot, and I had never met anyone like Ron, a young, child star, and now really an American icon. And I thought, well, it would be interesting to understand what he is thinking about. And so he surprised me when he came to my office. All he could talk about was making a feature movies as a director. And so there wasn't a lot of evidence that he would be supporting evidence that he would be great at that, or he'd go on and win Oscars at all. But I just believed in his basic essence. He had a kind of a glow about him. And I thought I would believe and bet on that person.
He is an incredibly kind and generous person. And he I think you learn a lot about him from his book and his values growing up, because he could have been a complete asshole.
Yeah,
right?
He could have been.
And so I understand how you were attracted to working with him. What was it about you that he was like, yeah, this is the guy? Because it's been an unbelievable partnership, but the likelihood of a 30, 40-year relationship is so unlikely.
It's so, yes.
So why you? What do you think it was about you that he was like, yep, you're the guy?
Well, he'll tell you, but it's basically, he was able to see in the first meeting that I hustled I really hustled hard, and that he felt that I could get people to believe in him, that I could get proper, the important meetings in Hollywood, even though we were just young punks. He could see that I could find my way into any building, into the right office with the right person and the right, and we would have we could have those conversations. He just felt like, as much as I guess we both believed in each other based on a very small amount of information.
Yeah. But going back to Ron, even though he's, I'm sure, he left an impression on you.
He did.
What was it about him that you thought, this is where I want to build a partnership with? There were lots of young directors, probably now, who are older directors who are incredibly successful.
Yes.
At that time, like Ron Howard, who were looking for a production partner. What was it about him? Because you probably encountered lots of people like Ron.
I did. It's that intangible thing. It's the energy you get from somebody. I just felt that you could, as you point out, you could feel his heart. You could feel his basic essence is very good, very kind, and very good. But he was driven, but a little bit handicapped by the fact that he was only at the time a child star and actor on Happy Days, and handicapped in that regard because he was kind of framed up as he's the actor on the show. And the other was he was very shy. And so he knew he couldn't be pushy enough or gritty enough to get people to pay attention. Yeah.
And he needed you.
He needed me. And I kind of need him. I mean, not kind of. We both need each other. And I sort of look at it like this, that I am a very good prospector of ideas and worlds, arenas, cultural arenas. Very good at prospecting. And I'm out there doing that all day long, every day. And he's a very good driller. So if I find the hole that I believe in, it's my informed instincts. He can drill into that hole and strike oil.
So initially, it wasn't, the idea wasn't, hey, let's build a production company together. Let's call it Imagine, because that would come later. Yeah. Initially, you each had your own separate production companies, but decided, let's work on a couple of films together. And of course, the first was Night Shift.
Yes. So I had 3 ideas for movies because what I learned from the previous years, which was like 3 or 4 years prior to that moment, I learned from Lew Wasserman, you got to walk in the door with something. You have to have some intellectual property. You have to be able to buy it, a book or a manuscript or a story in a magazine or journal, or you have to be able to create it, invent it. And so I didn't have the money or the power to buy things. So I just started mining my own dreams. And so I turned those dreams into pieces of paper that I would write down, and I'd write these ideas in prose form. And I wrote hundreds of them. And that's what helped me succeed in television at the young age of 25. And then with Ron, I had 3 movie ideas that I.
What were they?
One was called Night Shift, about a call girl ring run out of the New York City morgue.
Yes, with Henry Winkler and Shelley Long
and Michael Keaton.
Yeah. But that was one idea. And this was an original idea. There was no book, there was no screenplay, nothing out there. So a movie about a call girl ring in a morgue. I mean, it's a wild idea, but yeah, okay.
It was crazy. Basically, what I did do was I saw something in the New York Times, tiny little piece that said something. It did say "call girl ring in New York City morgue," and that was about all there was to it. And I thought, wow, I'm so good at getting jobs. Like I was like pretty expert, even going to Chatsworth High School. I could always get a job. But I could often get fired from the job. And I thought, okay, I'm going to get to the point in my life where I'm going to have tried every job and been possibly fired from all these jobs, and I'm going to end up with the shittiest job of all. And that moment happened. And then I thought, I'll probably be that guy that's in the New York City morgue with the shittiest job you could possibly have, walking around dead people.
Night shift at the morgue.
Night shift at the morgue. Yeah. Okay, so I kind of transported myself into that idea or that headline. The next one was Splash, a comedy about a man falling in love with a mermaid, a romantic comedy.
I mean, just on paper, it seems like a terrible film.
It does.
It just seems like a dumb idea. I imagine pitching that movie and people being like, "Wait, what?" Keep going.
No, it was thought of as a terrible idea. You're not wrong. Every person thought it was a horrible idea. So that was one, and then the other one. Well, there were 2 others. One was called Xanadu, which later got made with Olivia Newton-John.
Yes.
But that was about, I'd gone to Richard Perry, who's a big music producer. He was producing the Pointer Sisters. And then he said, well, let's go to this roller rink. And there was a roller rink in the Valley that was very popular, that all the music stars had shared. You went?
The one in I think it was in Chatsworth or
something
right?
like
it was
that.
a big
Yeah,
roller.
it was a big roller rink.
I had my 4th grade birthday there. Yeah,
That's funny.
I know the rink. It doesn't exist anymore,
No,
but I know it.
that's hilarious. So yeah, that makes total sense. So it was this popular place, and it was out in the valley, as we're pointing out. And I thought, wow, why don't I write a story about, like a roller disco, roller disco movie? And so I wrote that. And then there was one other, it was Patty Chayefsky did a play called Bachelor Party, and I thought to do it with, instead of guys, but 5 women. And Ron said, I know the one I'll do. I'll do the R-rated movie about a call girl ring in the morgue. He says, I'm just coming off Happy Days. I'm going to leave. And I don't want to do a PG film or a PG-13 film. I want to do an R-rated movie. And so that was it. He was positive he was doing that. And that's what we unified on.
So the sort of the kernel for that idea came from an article you read, and then you would start by kind of sketching out an idea.
Yes.
And then sometimes you wrote the screenplays, or you co-wrote the screenplays, but it would sort of start with and Splash. Do you remember how that idea came about?
I do. What happened is I was 25 years at this point. Okay, so I was 25 years old. I produced a movie for TV called Zuma Beach. It was all the most beautiful girls, all the great looking guys, 24 hours of the beach. And there was I'm at this location in Paradise Cove, and I see a girl that was literally the most beautiful girl at USC. She's now in this movie, but only as an extra. And I tried to talk to her, and she gave me a shush, like, be quiet. And then somebody whispered to her, Rosanna Arquette and Suzanne Summers said something probably to the effect, he's the producer. Oh my God, do you know him? And then she ran over to me and said, Brian, do you want to go out tonight? And, with very little shame, I just said yes. And then I thought, well, this is what Hollywood is. This is like my awakening to Hollywood. And would it be possible for me to find a really beautiful, nice girl that, isn't so transactional, that would just like me, Brian? And I thought, well, I don't think so. So I thought, well, what would that be? Then I superimposed a mermaid upon the definition of my perfect girl, and that became the movie.
Going back to this idea of talent spotting was Tom Hanks.
Yes.
Right? Tom Hanks, obviously, in Splash with, you and Ron, make that film. And it's really his first major, I think he'd been in a film already at that point, but Splash really was his first major role that kind of turned him into a star.
Yes.
At that time, right, and we've talked about this briefly before, and we've had Tom Hanks on the show.
Yes.
I think you can make the argument that he is like the Spencer Tracy of his generation. He is one of the greatest actors of his generation. And that was not clear in 1982 or 84. There was no defined destiny for Tom Hanks to become who he became. What do you remember seeing in him at that time that made you think this guy has potential to transcend the screen?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if we were positive he would transcend the screen, but we just felt like he's the perfect everyman, that everybody likes Tom Hanks. Everybody wants to save this guy, even though he wasn't yet the real Tom Hanks that we know him today. And we just felt he's funny, he's quirky, he's entertaining, so we like watching him. And at the same time, we root for him. And now those intangibles became very powerful to us, and we were convinced he could do it.
You and Ron decide to merge your production companies,
yes,
I think in around 85, and create Imagine Entertainment. Was the idea initially when you started working together to kind of just feel each other out and see how it would work, and then it was working so well that you both got together and said, let's just formalize this thing?
Yes, that's exactly what happened. We became very comfortable with each other. We felt like we've been in the foxhole together, of course, on night shift, and Ron was convinced he was going to get fired, and I don't know if he was going to get fired, but he was a little bit on the ropes, and he felt I saved him, and that to him meant a lot. He's a thoughtful person and deep, and he felt that this chemistry is working and that we both root for each other. And then we went on, and I trusted he'd make this movie splash because he said he would, and he did, and that turned into being a huge success financially and critically.
So obviously the two of you together would go on to produce iconic film. I mean, starting with Parenthood and My Girl, Apollo 13, Bowfinger, probably the most underrated Eddie Murphy film and maybe Steve Martin film ever. I just watched it with my kids. It is not always appropriate for them, but it's an amazing film.
It's funny.
Obviously, A Beautiful Mind, Frost Nixon. How did you guys sort of naturally, or maybe not naturally, kind of divide and conquer? Like, your role as the producer is sort of project manager, CEO.
Yes.
And Ron's role is to take a vision and then apply his lens to it.
Yes.
And is that sort of how you guys work, where you focus on what you do and Ron focuses on what he does, and you don't really clash?
Yeah, we don't really clash. And it's understood that I'm going to make, as the producer, I'm going to always keep an eye on his projects, the ones he's going to direct. And often I've found many of them, and then he goes on to make them great films. Both Apollo 13 and A Beautiful Mind and Backdraft and a few others that I was able to sort of prospect, and he was able to use his master artistic skills to make them great, because for me they're just ideas or worlds that I believed in, and then he would go on to mature them into something that was really masterful.
Brian, as you know, because I know you're a listener to How I Built This,
Yeah.
I often ask people about luck, because I think luck is a really powerful force. And I wonder how much of your relationship with Ron do you attribute to luck? Because so much of it is about personality. Both of you could have been and are extremely creative and talented, but you could still have clashed. There's so many stories
Yes.
of partnerships that break down for a variety of reasons. Ego, disagreements. It's now been more than 40 years. You're still working together. You're still making movies together.
know.
You've got a company together. What do you attribute that to?
I think trust, for sure. We share the same taste, whether qualitatively, what I think is good, he thinks is what's good. And we might not like the same movie, but we qualitatively will say that's an elevated piece of work. We appreciate the same things. Most of all, he introduced me to boundaries. And so we have boundaries of how trust gets, of behavior. We've never yelled at each other in 40 years. We've never raised our voice and argued with each other. We can do it much more subtly. So if I'm not comfortable with the score that he has on a movie, he will always say, "What do you think?" And I'll say, if I don't like it, I'll just go, "I'm not sure." To him, that means I don't like it. But he doesn't really want to hear those words, "I don't like it, it's shitty." He wants to hear something more gentle, more subtle, because his sonar is so highly tuned that he doesn't want to be lectured or told. He just give me a little tip and I'll try to fix it. That's what his attitude would be.
One of the ways, but what I discovered was one of the ways you have generated ideas and just grown as a sort of a creative is by formally arranging interviews with people.
Yes.
And a few years ago, you contacted me about How I Built This, and I was like, wow, this guy's a listener to How I Built This. I'm always so amazed because I am in a studio all day, so I don't know.
Yeah.
With millions of listeners, I just don't know. And
I loved it.
And it occurs to me that what I do on this show and on How I Built This and my other shows is basically a version of what you've been doing,
Yes.
which is you formally reach out to people and say, "Can I just go and interview you? Tell me more about doing that," because some of them have been very prominent people, some of them are unknown, and some of these lead to movie ideas, like Apollo 13.
Yes. Well, okay. So as you said very early on about curation. I use these meetings. I don't often. I seldom have ever turned a meeting into a story of that person, a whole movie about that person. Almost, I don't think I've ever done that in the 35 years. But I value the insights I gain from that person. And I'm able to create this large constellation of dots where each human being becomes a dot in this greater constellation of dots. And I just have trust or faith that someday they'll connect, and those dots do connect. So it might not be the person he or herself, or he or she, but it might be the insight that I gleaned from the conversation that has tremendous or real seismic value in the building of a story that becomes a big hit movie or television series. And so, so it's literally just kind of a curation system that first it's the constellation and the faith that these insights will connect, but more importantly, it keeps me relevant. So I'm understanding what the modern culture is doing, or I'm understanding what science is doing. I just went to Livermore Labs last week, spent the day there, because I met the woman, Kim, who's the director of the entire, first woman ever to be the director of Livermore Labs. And Livermore Labs, of course, was started by and also Edward Teller, who broke apart from Oppenheimer. And I knew Edward Teller, believe it or not. Who was the father of the hydrogen bomb. I went there. The reason I went is because they have this fusion project where they create fusion energy through lasers, where they point 192 lasers into a tiny little box that has a stack of diamonds in it, and they assault with the most absolute perfect timing this little box to turn it into enough energy that can actually charge the grid of energy in the North American continent. So they have to find a way to sustain that. But so I will go and get outside my comfort zone to learn all of these different things, and it's just been very valuable. So I'm able to, again, to create a curation system to say, no, I don't want to do that movie because it's been done, or I don't believe in it, or, oh, that's just a trend, and I don't make movies about trends. It sort of it melds together with my decision making.
Yeah, I meant to say Lawrence Livermore Laboratory out in Livermore, California, here in the Bay Area, and so you do things like that, like you just go to Livermore Laboratory, not with any specific idea or agenda in mind. Like maybe, could there be a movie about fusion? It's more just abstract. Like, let me just go check this place out, and maybe something will come to mind at some point.
That's it. Just like that. No agenda. And I was able to, I was lucky. Before I walked out, I went to their counterintelligence division, and that was very interesting. And I see connecting dots with that on that with something I'm actually already doing right now, a modern Army movie.
Right, and I think the Army movie is connected to a trip you took to Fort Irwin, right? I mean, you were invited to Fort Irwin to just go in M1 tanks and Fort Irwin in the Mojave Desert and just hang out with soldiers for a couple of days. No idea, no agenda. I guess it came from the Army. They invited you there because they love Apollo 13, and they're thinking, hey, could he make a film about the Army? And you just went there with no ideas,
No
just
ideas.
to check it out.
Zero ideas. Yes, exactly.
But it did lead to an idea that you're working on now?
Yes, correct. It did.
Which you probably can't talk about.
No, I can talk about it. It's just a modern army movie that really granulates the brotherhood of these, American soldiers in our military today, and it also finds a way to use the new helicopters, the V-280 that is now going to replace the Black Hawk. It uses that as a sonic and cinematic device to give us
Those are the ones that can take off and fly like airplanes.
Yeah, exactly. You get to know so much. It's amazing. That's right. That's exactly what it is. So it'll go about 125 miles an hour faster than the Black Hawk.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. They're incredible. So, I mean, it seems to me that really, your process, right, for triggering creativity is just putting yourself in all these different environments and constantly talking to people or going to places that may not lead to anything.
Correct.
Like probably 70% of the things you do
lead to nothing.
Like, what's an example of somewhere you went and visited that, hasn't led to anything specific, but was just interesting?
Well, 15 years ago, I had a 6.5-hour conversation at lunch with Fidel Castro in Havana at his military palace. That was gigantically interesting, and a lot to talk about, but it didn't lead to a project in any way. But I have so many of them.
Yeah.
I've met so many Nobel laureates that didn't quite lead, James Watson of Watson and Crick, the double helix. That didn't lead to anything other than insights about him.
Do you keep records or journals or notes?
I do. If I've done this 30 years, the first 10 years I took no notes, but I've then gone back in time to do those notes. And then the second 10 years, I took notes. In the third 10 years, I take notes and sometimes FaceTime, and they allow me to record it.
And so give me a sense of how often you do it now. I mean, like, here you are, you've won an Academy Award for Beautiful Mind. You've been nominated, so many times. You have nothing to prove as a producer and a creative, but clearly it's part of your discipline.
It is.
You are doing these meetings, like, how often? Always,
at the very minimum, once every 2 weeks, the minimum. But this week I will have done more than that. I have one right after this at 10:30 with Garth Brooks.
I'll let you go for that in just a moment. But, I wonder about this idea of curiosity, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that curiosity is more important than intelligence. I really do. And intelligence, curiosity go hand in hand.
Yeah.
You become more intelligent the more curious you are. And it's a choice.
Yeah.
You can choose to just approach the world with a sense of curiosity. And I wonder how you, now that, you're experienced, established, people often come to you with the answers. They want you to tell them the answers.
Okay.
But oftentimes you don't have them and you have more questions than answers.
True.
So how do you keep that sort of naive approach that you talked about when you were, 25,
Yes.
now that you are older
Yes.
and more experienced? How do you maintain that without, I don't know, and receive the generosity from people, even with your experience?
Well, I've always coveted that trait of innocence. In other words, when I realized I was when the Stupid Mermaid movie was successful, because hundreds of people said it was stupid. I mean, it wasn't just one, hundreds. I'd go back and one executive and another executive, that executive had fired. I'd go again because I tried to get that movie made for 5 years. So I was constantly knocking on doors and windows and houses. Once the so I just concluded, like, it probably, whatever. It might have been the stupidest idea, but guess what? It was what I loved and what I saw in it I thought was hugely valuable, that it was love. And if I can make the stupidest idea become successful, then I'm going to go about doing things that really are just to connect to my soul, that just connect to me. I don't prognosticate, oh yeah, this will be a big hit. Or when I did Apollo or American Gangster, I don't think, oh, that's going to be a big hit and be remembered. I just know I want to do it. That's all. Usually there's some universal theme, like brotherhood, or we're rooting for family. Even Parenthood or even Arrested Development is a goofy family, but you root for family. I find that inarguable. And you root for love. I find that inarguable. I think we all need and want love. And to me, that lives inside the many of the movies that I do, and certainly the successful ones.
Yeah, and you follow your curiosity,
Yeah.
which brings about more creativity.
So I definitely don't know all the answers. I'm always happy to help people if they come with just a slightly informed point of view. But hey, I want to be a producer. Tell me how to do it. I really I seldom ever do that meeting. I never do that. I feel like look, I was a acutely dyslexic kid in junior high school all the way through high school. I was basically a C student. I'm not special. I've made myself special. I've created that, if anything, by hard work and curiosity, and seeing how the power of that engine can really be useful in your life, give you a competitive advantage. And I think anyone could do this. You just start off being courteous, like say asking somebody in the elevator, how are you, instead of looking at your iPhone. I find that eye contact is of course the windows to somebody's soul. You know, I find all those adages to be quite truthful.
That's my conversation with Brian Grazer. We're going to link to some clips to his films at our website, thegreatcreators.com/Grazer. And if you want to hear and see more conversations like this one, please click the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. And thanks for watching.